Let's think more about the idea of emotion by applying it to a simple idea for a story. And not only are we going to think about emotion, the seventh part of the rhetoric of story, whilst doing this, we're also going to bring in all of the earlier six. We're going to review the whole thing through example of one story idea. Let's take the idea from Aristotle, the classic idea of a man fighting a lion. It seems almost too simple to tell a story about, but there's a tremendous story in there, a story that you could write as a novel, that you could make as a film, that you could produce even as a 10-hour HBO television series if you wanted to. All begins with the idea of a man fighting a lion. What's the emotional experience at the heart of that story idea? Well, of course, it must be fear. That's the emotion that we're going to experience when we're fighting a lion, that we want to give to the audience in our story. Once we have that emotional experience, we need a dramatic question to go with it. And of course, the dramatic question in this story is, will the man defeat the lion? Throughout the course of the story, we're going to be coming back to that dramatic question, will the man defeat the lion? That gives us the seventh part of the rhetoric of story, the emotional experience at the heart of our story. Let's go back all the way to the beginning, to number one, the first element of the rhetoric of story, change. What's the change at the heart of this story? We have an external change, the defeat, ultimately, of the lion. We know really that from the beginning of the story that's going to happen. The lion's going to be defeated. This is the external fight, the external change that we're following. But what's the internal change? This is the battle with fear. This is what's archetypal about the story of a man fighting a lion, is that in this story we see our own battles with fear. Whether it's a battle as a child because we're scared of going to school, or a battle as an adult because we're scared of going to work. These are the fears that we face, and they're represented archetypally in this battle of a man against a lion. We have the change in place. Number two, the self at the heart of the story, a man. That's too generic. Let's say he's a warrior. He's a tribal warrior. He's in the Stone Age. All he has is a spear. He sees a wild and dangerous world around him. He's going to use this single weapon, the spear, to fight the lion. This is the self at the heart of the story. Now we have details coming in. Number three, once we have the self, we have the other. Well, if this is a tribal warrior, we know he must have a tribe. Elders, other warriors, wives, and children. Other people surrounding him. We know that there's an antagonist in this story, the lion, who the man is fighting. We also want to introduce an emotional focus. Let's have a child in the tribe who the man must protect from the lion. Now we're really starting to tell a great story. Once we have the change, the self, and the others in place, we have conflict. This story is almost telling itself at this point. We have the tribal warrior, we have the child who he needs to protect, and we have the external conflict, the lion. There's also an internal conflict, his own fear. He has to overcome his fear to go out and fight the lion in this way. Okay, this gives us the engine of our story. Now we have the next element of the rhetoric of story. We're going to move on to structure. What's the structure of the story? Let's take a 3-act structure. We have the first act of the story, the exposition. We meet the tribal warrior. We meet the child who he's going to protect. We meet the tribe, and the lion is introduced. Then we move on to the second act. We're going to have a series of conflicts between the man and the lion. in protection of the child, and there's going to be rising action, a growing drama as the story unfolds. And then finally, we know in the 3-act structure, we're going to have the final crisis, climax, and resolution of the story, with the man finally fighting and defeating the lion, and then of course our emotional resolution, taking the child and returning with him to the tribe. You see how much of the story we already have here just by applying the basic elements of the rhetoric of the story. Then we have events. We take our structure and we fill it in with specific events. So we see an event between the man and the child. The child, let's say, is his daughter, and they've gone hunting together. Now we have another event, the man teaching his child to hunt. This is taking us on a cause and effect. There's a huge storm. They're separated from the tribe and they're thrown out into the wilderness. Now we know there's going to be a key event of them encountering the lion in the wilderness. We'll also see further events following on in the story. The first conflict with the lion, from which the man and the child run away. The second conflict with the lion, where the man is desperately injured. They seek shelter in a cave. In the cave, let's have another character. There is an old wise man who imparts a secret to the tribal warrior about how to fight a lion. And the secret is that the lion is even more scared than the man is. This also implies further events in that lead us into the crisis, climax, resolution of the story, the final battle between the man and the lion, and then a key event returning to the tribe and a great party and celebration at their return. Here we started with a simple idea, a man fighting a lion. What we end up with is an archetypal story that we could tell in any format, because we have applied the elements of the rhetoric of story. The final one of these is the one that we've been discussing in this final talk, emotion. How does emotion play through this story? How do those other elements, tension and suspense, how do you weave tension and suspense through this story? And our final revelation, how is this set up earlier on? Perhaps we see a small scene earlier in the story of the man facing a fear. Perhaps he's facing the fire. The details of this story we can add later. What I hope you take from it is how we can actually apply the rhetoric of story and how pivotal emotion is to that story. Because if we think back to the beginning of that process, it was identifying the emotion at the heart of the story and what these elements, the tribal warrior, the young child, the lion, what they represent to the emotional experience, in this case, fear. To round out our talk here, if you take one thing away from this, it really should be that while stories may be tremendously complex, while stories may come in many different formats, from film to stage to books, while stories may have many different elements, whilst they may be about a change, they will have a self, they will have others, they will have a structure, and they will have key events. What's really imperative in the story and what will define your story for your audience is the emotion at the heart of the story you are telling. That brings the rhetoric of story to a close. I hope you have enjoyed it and you've got a lot from it. I've been Damien Walter. Thank you very much.